Chapter 28. You'd think the county bulletins would tell you about the pitfalls, but they don't. So I'm telling you now, and mark my word, this is the most important information you'll ever need to know. Before you buy a goat, the important word here is before, buy a chain. Get one with a stake and a built-in swivel, so you don't have to run out every 10 minutes, fearing he's wound himself clockwise and is laying in the ditch choking to death. I could say that nobody had told us, but to be perfectly honest, Corey had mentioned that goats love to eat bark off trees and argyle socks off the clothesline, and that they love to jump to the highest point on the landscape. This, after Dor bought her new Oldsmobile convertible, brought about an even bigger gap in our relationship. Another thing the bulletins don't tell you, and even Corey, with all his dark insights, had not foreseen, is that a goat may become a carbon monoxide addict, like Goaty. At the sound of an engine, he'd leap to the exhaust pipe and gulp the deadly gas until his legs would begin to buckle, and he'd stagger off like W.C. Fields. That's going to kill him someday, Corey warned. Well, so... Another thing, you can't trust a goat around a bucket of paint. But nobody has to tell you that, not even a county bulletin for gosh sakes. Especially if it is bright red, specially mixed, and setting on a high scaffold on which two pretty young maids with paintbrushes in hand are gainfully employed. But pardon me, we were talking about chains, which Corey finally bought. Poor Goaty. From then on, the only thing that made him prance for joy was when he would see Sig approaching with his water buckets. Not that he liked drinking water, mind you. He liked butting buckets. In spite of Sig's efforts, empty containers were always scattered around Goaty's premises or on his horns. Invariably, he needed attention when I was dressed in nylons and high heels and heading to town. I used to wonder, what was the point in filling buckets since Goaty drank so little water anyway? But then, reluctantly, I'd jump out of the car and pick up the buckets. Off I'd go, under the fence, across the pasture, through the blackberries, to the faucet, and back again, fully mindful of what I'd see in the rearview mirror as I'd be heading down the driveway. Chains are not foolproof, however, nor was Sig, nor was I. Sometimes I just got plumb tired of screeching, "Go and chain up your goat, blah blah." Evidently, I had failed my parental responsibilities one stormy Tchaikovsky night. Everything in our little house was vibrating. The windows rattled alarmingly, and noises in the attic suggested that rafters were being pulled out of their sockets. Or maybe it was the rats being jarred out of their holes, or bats out of the belfries. I was exercising my Ephesian spirit. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. My whole armor was ski clothes over my long johns, which, at that time, women called snuggies, and my red knee socks. I was preparing dinner when I heard a reassuring sound, the sound that always calmed my fears, a hard thrust against the back door. I called to the children who were in the front room, "Daddy's home, dinner's ready." Failing to observe that the door didn't open, I went on with last-minute details, draining the potatoes and setting the butter on the table. The door lurched again. "Wait a minute," I called out. I braced the door with my shoulder, turned the handle, all the while anticipating a warm hug and tender kiss. Instead, the door flew open, sending me reeling backwards. A horned, mud-dripping creature leaped past me. For a moment I imagined I was staring at the devil himself. Pausing for a moment, he eyed the strange surroundings, like an actor pushed on stage at the wrong cue. I started towards him, but before I could corral him, he steadied himself, took a leap, and landed on the kitchen table. I looked on in horror. Out in his natural habitat, he hadn't seemed so big, but on our shaky little table, he looked like a double dose of growth hormone. Dripping mud. One hoof was in the bowl of potatoes, and another had come to rest in the dish of butter, most of which had been forced up between the cleft in his hoof. I grabbed him by the collar. He resisted. I yelled, "Hey kids, come and help, the goat's on the table." Ever notice that when you yell spinach, kids have homework to do, but when you shout ice cream, they come running? My message must have sounded like hot fudge sundae. They all began tugging from different quarters. It solved nothing except made Goaty's footing even more unsteady. In a matter of seconds, every dish on the table had been desecrated. Their horseplay annoyed me. I implored them to get serious. "Call Daddy," yelled Eric. "Don't you dare," I threatened. The thing I dreaded most, next to being shipped to Siberia, was having Corey come in. With that, I engaged in what everyone calls the last resort. "Dear Lord, help!" I grabbed Goaty around the belly and hoisted him off the table. "Open the door!" I wrestled him all the way to the back porch and threw him to the winds. Don't ever let me catch you on the kitchen table again until... As I brushed off the mud and began opening cans, I warned the kids, if you want to keep the goat, you'd better not mention this to Daddy. The only sound during dinner was the Tchaikovsky wind. Corey made no comment on the Spam and pickled beets, but while he was folding his napkin, he said something that almost sent us into orbit. Sig, I wish that when you come in from playing with the goat, you'd wash up better. It smells like goat in here. I grappled for a quick response before Eric could open his mouth. Oh, I don't know, honey. Things tend to smell alike in the country. If you smelled the goat now, he'd probably smell like the kitchen. That broke the barrier. The kids began to howl as if it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard their mother say. As for me, I pulled a loose thread from the hem of the tablecloth and tied it around my finger to remind me to, gee, now I forgot.